Well, good morning, Dr. Brad.
We meet again. Sorry, there's a helicopter landing right now.
Well, you have your I have been working and my brain is busy face on.
Your brain is busy?
You have your I have been working and my brain has been busy face on.
That's right. I like. It's a weird day, man. It's like yesterday was tragic in the neighborhood. Lost a fellow with a tractor accident, which is unfortunate, and it's to just put a pall on the week, and that's to be, it's not to be dispelled, so it's not to be it's just to be continue pressing on, right?
Yeah.
And
you live in a neighborhood where you have tractors.
what's that?
You live in a neighborhood where you have tractors.
Well, the fellow was he was working on a lot for his young fellow and for his family to build a house on, and went over the side and got crushed. And it's like, oh, hell of a thing. It's like, okay, so that's put a damper on my mood a bit. And but in it, the other issue is this is like the news is appalling in that it's the same thing over and over again, and it's just repetitious and not moving forward in any notable fashion. So it's just grinding. So here we are, Monday morning, starting again for a new week, and I do have work to do.
I have court on Friday.
You should wear your pirate shirt.
I should get a pirate shirt.
Yeah, wear the pirate shirt to the court.
No, well, it's online now. Court's online.
I think the floating head thing with the pirate shirt is perfect. They can't.
I'm sure I'll get to be even more humorous this way.
I don't know what else.
I have a judge's robe. I have my judge's robe. I suppose I'll wear that.
Whatever works, man. We make it just we're going for operational success, right?
I don't know. You never know with a judge. It depends on their mood, their background, what they're used to, what the case before you.
That's it. What time of day it is, how close to lunch is it?
Yeah, it's the same shit. So, and for my stuff, it's just I have to I just have to determine whether it's a procedural wall. In other words, they're just going to throw up I'm just going to do this because I can get away with it, or whether they're going to actually be a judge. I don't know. So
yeah, I don't know. It's just having to deal with them at all is problematic, I think.
Well, I love court, right? I mean, honestly,
okay.
I love a courtroom. I love debating court. I just think it's fun. The problem is when it's personal, then you're emotionally involved, and that's what I don't like. Right? I like if it's business. Well, it's I'm going to win, I'm going to lose, whatever. It's just a cost of doing business. Or if it's political, it's whatever.
Right.
But the minute your emotions are involved, and you feel there's been an injustice, you get upset. So
yeah. So it's all very good. I'm working on my synthesis here that I haven't had a chance to pull it together, so I won't talk about it, which is related to the leftist fictionalisms and pushing around the necessity to adapt. That's interesting to me, I'm trying to write it up, so we'll go forward from there.
Here's the thing. Here's how they'll play it, by the way. They play the adapt thing. Well, why aren't you adapting to us? Well, adapting means you're increasing capital. It doesn't mean you're spending it down. And so
it's like our adaptation is to try to preserve capital.
Yes.
It's like it's a defensive maneuver. It's no good. That's very bad because it's costing everybody a lot. All the machinations.
For every dollar that goes to your personal consumption is a dollar that doesn't go to commons production. Every dollar goes to commons. is a multiplier. In other words,
That's right.
right? And so where every dollar goes, your consumption is effectively a loss. Anyway,
That's it. So I'm going to make you the host. Is that enough of a warm up for you, or you want to?
no, but I didn't get to my laundry yesterday, so I'm getting that. I have only about 50 of these white shirts left.
You're running low, huh?
Well, that 50 that's when I get down to 50, then I'm probably running low. But I'm running out of fancy underwear, so I'm going to have to do that pretty quick.
There's always Amazon, right?
You didn't have to say that.
It goes without saying, I suppose. Oh my!
Oh, bad ideas spreading. Encourage.
Right? You're only making it worse.
Only making it worse. All right, now that got me there. Now I feel like working because I got to laugh.
Right.
All right. So you want me to start? Go ahead. You want to say something?
I'm just thinking about where we were. We were reviewing the law and legitimacy. And so I guess I want you made you the host so you can share your screen and do a little review and get everybody warmed up to the topic of the day.
All right. So just as a quick reminder, we're working on what the hell does law mean?
Right.
Why does, what do we need in order to cooperate? What rules of cooperation do we need? What we tend to call those laws, what the kinds of laws are there, what do they mean, what kind of legitimacy do they come, what is the origin of legitimacy? What's the difference between legitimacy and legality? Where am I find it? We went down through what constitutes a right, what constitutes, in other words, a natural right or desired right, an existential right, or an existential privilege. In other words, the difference between the right and the privilege. We went through what knowledge was required for each of these kind of things. We went through incrementals to suppression, the three methods of influence, the coercive institutions, the problem of neural economy, right? We said, well, okay, now knowing all this, what does this mean? What's the etymology of law? How is law ambiguous? I think I'm going out of order now. We said, well, so law is just epistemology, and then we said that we would cover today. Well, since we went over, now we know what makes a law legitimate, like in its origin. What makes a law legitimate in its content?
Right.
What is a law? What makes it legitimate in its origin? And makes it legitimate in its content, right?
Right.
So makes, oh gosh, I didn't share my screen.
Not yet. Sorry, I didn't tell you.
It's okay. What makes
There we go.
a law right?
That's a good question. Yeah. Thank you.
It's
early morning Monday.
all right.
Right.
We did this already. I'll clean this up in a bit. That's what I did yesterday, was try to clean some of this stuff up.
Very good.
But what makes a law legitimate in its content? Well, believe it or not, we went over, we keep disambiguating things,
Mhm.
right? So we break them down into its first principles. And like a really good example is when we went back up here to, where is it? Demonstrated interests, right? So here's a demonstrated interest. We have existential interests, obtained interests, and then in common interests, we have common physical, common institutional, common human capital, and common opportunity interests. So there's a lot of detail in the concept of the disambiguation and a lot of causality in that spectrum, right? So the same thing is going to be true down here with what makes a law legitimate in its content. So before, what we said is that we discussed the fact that you have this problem of how does a law constructed, right? Is it a universal law, an agreement law, a privilege, a justification, or a command, right? And then we said, well, we know that we want it to be morally, and we want it to be legally or procedurally. I should probably do it. We want it to be procedurally legitimate, right? And we probably want it to be moral, right? And but the problem is, how do we test its construction, its content and construction? Sorry, I didn't rehearse this, so I'm trying to shift gears because I didn't finish reorganizing that. So
Right.
I think it's probably making clear as we've gone from describing it to what are the different types of it, to what is a right, etc., to what makes it legitimate. And what we're trying to do now is we're saying, well, most of what we talked about before was that it had to be survivable. Right. And so it had to have a point of origin, and it had to be survivable. But what makes a thing legitimate in the sense that it's legitimate in origin,
Right.
Constitution, and consequence, right? We want to know what makes it legitimate. I think I'm just going to switch over to where I have this written already.
Right.
So so now there are just properties of it, and I'm just going to go over one of them. The first is that that's too complicated. Let's start down here. So when we say a law needs to be isonomic, we mean that it is universally applicable to all within a class, and specific rules not applicable to all within a class prohibited. In other words, it's a law if I say all people over 65 are going to be eligible for this, right? Or all people are going to be required to have this obligation. There's obviously the test of fitness. If you're too young and incompetent, and you're too old or incompetent, you're otherwise incompetent. So all competent people have these obligations, and we tend to give people rights even if they can't follow obligations if they're incompetent. We just don't give them say. So what you can't do is you can't make a law and said all people named Doolittle must be something or other, right? That's not isonomic, right? Furthermore, it's actually a violation of law to say all members of Congress, right, have a specific right. Right? You could say, in order to protect for general safety, that's a policy question, but that's not a law. So the next one is that it's got to be internally consistent, meaning, which should be obvious.
Okay.
But that means that you can't put a person into a position whereby the individual has to make, it cannot obey the law because it's logically inconsistent, or can't even understand the law because it's logically consistent. And so you can't obey it in the via negativa, like you can't break, you can't avoid breaking it because you can't tell what it is. There's an awful lot of those, by the way. And you can't do it because you're because they've entrapped you in it. So a common one is, I don't think it's here, non-retroactivity. I'm gonna copy this over. I'm gonna do it so I can comment on it. I was gonna try to avoid it, but what the hell?
Right.
So I'm gonna go with these. This is too deep. This is a precondition. Internal consistency isn't hard, right? All right. The other one is non-retroactive.
Right.
So this goes to no law.
It's ex post facto law, right?
Right. And so you can't, there's no law, no crime, so you can't outlaw something afterwards. Now, what is some oddities that creep up in here? Some of these problems are like grandfathering, right? You've got to be like grandfather things. Another one that comes up is the problem of a natural law tort, crime, violation, right? Tort, crime, legislative, violation, regulatory, violation, procedural. The spectrum of things is huge, right? I mean, so the answer is that if I've got one of these two, you may not need a law to cover it. Because, right? So in other words, so just because there's no law against something, all you're saying is you imposed cost upon the demonstrated interest of others. There doesn't have to be a law for that, right? Because it's a general rule. Crimes are usually directly articulated, right? Because they're saying this specific thing is prohibited, right? Usually a crime is by intent.
Right.
Right. Now, you could have a violation, and this can happen because of just simply ignorance. Right. This is a problem of lack of due diligence. You can't know. It's absolutely impossible to know. I mean, the amount of law that's out there,
Right.
it's impossible to know. So what you're really counting on is regulators to create processes for you and ensure your conformity, because you can't know anything. So the basic point I want to make is this one. right? So natural law, how did I manage to do that? What's going on here? So the problem here is it does not require articulation. And these requires.
Hmm. So it's implicit versus explicit.
Right. No, the problem is, the problem, the problem is that the truth is an awful lot of crime. Misdemeanor. Right, so there's legislative violation, procedural. There's another problem with our law is that the law is categorized by punishment, not by the categories that are meaningful to the user, right? I mean, so you might have a low punishment for a very serious crime, but you might have a very high punishment for a low crime, which is the problem with drugs, right? I mean, the drug crimes. So when we're talking about this stuff, you get to the, how am I going to say this? Not, it should require articulation that killing somebody is illegal. But so what we're really doing is we're clarifying the severity, right? Because what we're trying to accomplish with the law is goal of accomplishment of a law are three choices, three criteria: restitution, punishment, or prevention, and prevention.
Yeah, inhibition.
Right, inhibition of imitators.
Right.
Right. And so this is the problem, is like, well, why did I get, why does this exist? Well, it exists because we have three criteria the judge is trying to, the court, the people are trying to solve. So there is, and in the case of legislation, what you're trying to do is adaptation. Right. So you're trying to force coercion. This makes sense? Am I getting this across?
Yeah, no, that's right.
Right.
So it's social adaptation is what you're accomplishing there.
Right.
So there's individual elements. The first three appear to be individual, or the first two are individual and the second two are social.
Correct. Thank you for that.
That's nice.
I always tell people, sorry, I was just thinking about this, is that when you're talking about the law, I'm gonna do an aside here. When you're talking about law, you're talking about the law, period, which is this, right? Legislation, constitution, legislation, jurisprudence, and lawyering.
Yeah.
And possibly the attorneying, just clerical, really. is adversarial. This is decidability. And this is proscription. And this is terms. This is science. Right. And so what happens is we use, this is another example of, well, you say, I'm going to law school. Are you? I have all these lawyers that follow me. It's kind of interesting. I said, why don't they teach us this? I'm like, because they don't actually know it. Oh, and there's also and possibly legal assistant. What's the word for it?
Paralegal.
So, and possibly those who are regulatory enforcers and administrators. Well, I mean, you have this fucking huge thing. So what are you teaching? So the point I want to get, there's a lot of rules, right? And the rules are like this fractal mess that goes down. And what you want, of course, is they've got to maintain your ability to act, right? So, but that's the problem. This is, that's what you're trying to accomplish. But you're also trying to regulate behavior. Right. So, fuck. What did I just do? Look how much stuff we've done.
It's quite
Look how
impressive.
much, it's all your fault.
Wow.
Okay, this is what I wanted to do before I hit the wrong key. Am I doing okay? I feel like I'm boring you.
No, you're doing good.
Okay, so I should move this.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the reason we want. So the problem here is regulates behavior of the vegetativa. So the problem is that you have this enormous pyramid of laws. I want to think I'm going to compliment the French for once in a lifetime, and I do it once in a while. But the French Academy has come out and said, we really don't need any more clarification to our laws. You can come up with new policy, but there's no more. We don't need any more laws, right? In the United States, and so they have a process whereby they can review law, can and do review law. We really don't. We have a market for the falsification of laws. So one of the things that is a problem here is that meaning laws should expire if they are not universal. So know the difference between a descriptive law
Right.
and a policy law. The joke is that there are still blue laws in New England, where I'm from, and some of these laws are hysterical. I mean, it's Puritan law, right? Nobody pays attention to it. So the problem is, what happens if you accumulate laws nobody pays attention to?
You devalue all the law.
You devalue all the laws, right? All right. So if we get down to that, what we're going to find here is that we want laws to be limited, right? So that all acts need to state their purpose, scope, and limits. This is the one of the big holes, right, in our legal system.
Yeah.
Is that our common law evolved when things move very slowly, except we've moved into a world where things move very quickly. So essentially, almost basically, all laws should be treated as projects with an objective and an end test of completion of that objective.
Right.
Right. And so you want to have them limited. So they should state their purpose and their scope and their limits, the demands, etc. So we're trying to prevent, and this prevents that's devaluation of the law in general, manipulation by arcane laws, right?
Right.
And judicial rule legislation on the bench.
Right. And it's like, I guess one of my objectives or objections is the law enforcement ignoring the law themselves. It's just objectionable.
The law. Yeah, I want to get to that in just a second.
Right.
Where's law definition? Okay, now we want definition. All right, and so what did you just say?
It has to do with the law enforcement selectively enforcing the law.
You don't have that here. Thought I had that here.
You have enforceable.
Yeah, but I don't have it as enforced.
Right.
I'll renumber this later.
Right.
And so that's the same problem of that we covered up here. Laws should expire and they should be enforced, right?
Seems self-evident.
Right? Is that it's just funny because I'm trying to put it in order here. So it's got to be enforceable, right? I mean,
that's right.
Right. So the problem is that I don't need to explain enforceable, and it's got to be enforced, all right? And
in fact, there's a duty to enforce.
Now, what about,
Otherwise, it's a pocket veto by the law enforcement.
so this gets into the problem of the hierarchy. So at the end point is the individual, the community, the parties involved. Community, police, the judiciary, community, legislature, bureaucracy, police, the judiciary, and the most important person, the sheriff.
Right.
I'll put this out as really, really important. Right. And the end result is the militia. So this is the cycle.
Cycle of enforcement.
Right. And so, you got to say, well, I mean, when you're talking about enforcement, there's the individual, the parties involved, the community, the legislature, the bureaucracy. From the bureaucracies, I think it's a question of whether we're talking about this, because it depends on how you view this. And my understanding in the workflow, it's from the police to the judiciary, right? So the bureaucracy states that the police captured, the judiciary executes, the sheriff enforces it, and the militia enforces it at scale, right? And then the army. Right. So the problem here is interesting, is that the person who our rule of law depends upon is this one. Because you have the monarchy up here. Right. You have the monarchy up there. So the problem here is that these people are this person says, yeah, I don't care, but this process failed. It's his job to say, yeah, I'm not going to enforce that law. And you see sheriffs doing that, right? That's what a sheriff's job is to do. It's to enforce. The sheriff needs to be what we see in old Southern sheriffs that we still have some, like the guy in Florida who's always cracking me up. I don't know what that, this is my community, I fucking own it.
Right.
Right. I'm elected, I own it. And if the process fails, sorry, I'm the last line of defense. And if I have to, I'll get these people. And if they have to, they'll get these people. Right. And if they have to, if the problem is these people, I'll get this person.
Right.
So the problem with most thinking is the failure of to treat. So the problem with most intuition on the law is that it doesn't follow an epistemic cycle, but is instead constant or decided, always decided, settled law. And so the same thing happens with the judiciary. This general law, right? The purpose of the legislature, right, is to make a general rule, not apply it to an individual, right? We said it has to be isonomic.
Right.
But the sheriff, the judge is not supposed to do that at all. He's supposed to say, okay, but that's a general rule. And in this thing is a specific instance.
Right.
In this specific instance, what combination of general rules result in me making a decision? So, and then the same thing happens is that this process can fail, just like this process can fail.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
I feel like I'm not making the case here, but and I'm listening to you, trying to make sure I'm making the case.
No, that makes sense.
Right. So what we're trying to illustrate here is I keep trying to make this point, right? Is that, where is it? Is this, right? There is no, the only time law is settled is when nobody ever brings the fucking thing up again.
We're done talking about it, right?
Right, we're done. I mean, the public has adapted to it, right? So law is a theory, an evolutionary theory that will work or it won't.
The funny thing is, like, if we're talking about it, it's just a theory.
It's just a theory.
So it's a legal theory.
I'm listening to you, I'm waiting.
And it's seeking to, it's like the legislature is trying to enact a legal theory, instantiate it in the society.
Right.
And using coercive force of the state in order to do so.
Yep. I mean, that's okay, right?
That's okay. That's what they do.
That's okay. Right. I mean, especially if you're suppressing an irreciprocity. But what if you're creating one?
We have a
What if
special
you're
name for
creating an
those people.
impossibility? Like multiculturalism. I knew you knew that was coming, didn't you?
I know, I could smell it coming. It's like V.I. Lenin. Oh, under a glass box.
I should have put this in as disambiguation. So, I mean, so there's some laws that are just to disambiguate specific problems. So you may need to create a law that just separates, like the common one is first, second, and third degree murder and manslaughter.
Right.
And so once it's disambiguated, that means it's possible to decide it. Right. And this includes often lists, which is what we do.
Yeah, it is.
We produced scientific tests that falsify law. Right? So we have these 5 criteria. Now it's 5. Disambiguation, restitution, punishment, prevention, adaptation. Now, in our history, it's interesting is that the common law in our Germanic history is it's all restitution based, right? Because under sovereignty, we don't have the right of punishment. We only have the right of restitution. So when people ask, well, why did we sacrifice people? Because the gods determined it, not the community. So we haven't violated individual sovereignty. See how, all this shit makes sense. If you just step back and you understand the rules of the game at any given point in time, everything makes perfect sense. But if you take it out of context, it doesn't. Now, some of this stuff is ridiculous, like sacrificing your son, whatever. But a lot of that time, the reason you sacrifice your son is to prevent the conflict between brothers over who was going to get inheritance. So, we always look at these stuff and we listen to the story, right? It's like we listen to our own parables, right? Our own stories. But you have to understand the reason, there's a reason underneath that.
There's a subtext, right? It's like the subtext is important.
It's almost always rational. So, if your religion is individual sovereignty, right? And that means there is no authority, you can demand restitution because that's a community issue. But the minute you say punishment, now you're aggressing, you're not restituting. And so the idea is that restitution should be enough, right, to settle it. Because when restitution is enough, it means it's because public pressure is punishment, right? And so anonymity,
Yeah.
anonymity eliminates right. So how do I do this? I'm gonna do it this way. I love that you asked me to divide these by personal and social.
Good. There you go. That's very good.
Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so I don't think in the we covered internally consistent, but I want to say here that to preserve ability of the individual. There's a great one in Connecticut because while I was away, they changed the gun
You
law.
fix that.
What?
You got a parsing error there.
In Connecticut, they didn't grandfather in the high capacity magazines.
Okay,
right.
So they're ex post facto law.
Right, but you just have to pay $80 or something like that. I mean, I don't know what it is, but I just thought it was interesting that it's actually grandfathered at a price. Right.
Okay.
Right. So it's not even a crime. I think it's there's a fee for it. So that's a great example of an entrapment. Right. So let's say you just have this thing in the house, right? You've had it for 15
Right.
years or 20 years. And they changed the law and you haven't done anything. The problem is now there's actually no way of disposing it because even if you try to give it over to the police, you can get arrested just for having it. So it's a method of entrapment, right?
Yeah, prevent entrapment. Right.
And lastly, right? That makes sense?
Yeah, I'm thinking of the Canadians right now. I got nothing good to say about the Canadian authorities, man. I mean, it's their demonstrated illegitimacy.
Well, the problem is they're on, like I said, they have an English population that because of the presence of the French is producing an authoritarian French model. So Trudeau is governing like a Frenchman. He's not governing like an Anglo. And
Oh, I see. I did not recognize that as the stem of the problem.
The other origin of the problem is that the people who were sent, including my mother's ancestors, the French people who were sent to the St. Lawrence River Valley, which is the settlement area, which is today's Quebec, right? These people were from the lower classes. They were literally.
Oh, so they're exported like the Australians, huh?
Right. Well, they were offered the opportunity, but the only reason you would go to a fucking place that cold and that brutal is because you had no choice. So the problem is that the English in Canada, especially in Ontario, they're middle class, like Newfoundland. Newfoundland was middle class. the problem, the problem is that Quebec is lower class. Well, of course, what is the lower class government going to demand? It's going to maintain. So the problem really is that just as England can't fit into Europe because it has the continental law, in England, because the continent is continental rather than common law. French Canada can't fit into Canada because it's basically hostile to the rest of the country, and it's got enough population to throw it. And for some reason, they think this fucking matters, right? I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, the only reason they're not that the capital's in Ottawa is just so the Queen would make the French feel better. It's a really beautiful building, and right down the street from the government is this one of the nicest hotels in the world. I've spent a lot of time there. And
there you go.
They have special floor. Good hotels have special floor for VIPs, in other words, people who need protection. So in any event, how did I get off on that? Yeah.
No, we were just discussing it's the legitimacy of the law, prevent delegitimization of the law, the legislature.
Well, look what's happening in the United States and Canada and in Australia. Now we're talking about, like, I think you're in on this conversation. We're talking about making some videos for the Australia. I wouldn't be the presenter. I would just produce the content for the Australian audience to teach them the stuff they don't know. Like the Australian Constitution has the thing I want, which is you can appeal to the monarchy.
Oh,
right. Whether she'd do that at the moment, I'm not sure, but
she would be well loved to do it.
What?
She would be well loved,
right,
if she were to do it.
It's what we need, right? The second thing is that, but it has even less description of what law means than we. Basically, they have rule by parliament, not rule by law. So they have rule, right? And the British have this weird mixture of there's the common law, but theoretically they have rule by parliament, right? And the Queen can theoretically veto, but because it's a fucking chaotic mess, right? We've got rule by rights that is specific, that on top of the common law that really is rule of law, right? So the law prevails, right? The parliament can't override the Constitution, right? Our Congress, right? You have to go through the constitutional modification process, right? But fucking Canadians, they just make shit up every other goddamn day. So they don't have rule of law.
No.
And so the problem is when we say act, we also mean, more importantly, to plan because of
right.
production cycles. Now, we use the word production cycles from economics, but it basically means anything that requires more than tomorrow. Right. And so, you say, well, I have to produce dinner. Well, that's going to take you half an hour. Right. That's a production cycle. But, it's like, what's the production cycle for this Apple computer I'm using?
Right.
A couple of years. Well, that's a couple of years for the modifications for this model. But what's the production cycle to produce to get to this model?
Right.
From the first model? Decades.
Yeah. Right. When you're talking about capital intensive projects, it's like, okay, you're $1 billion to set up something.
Yeah. So the problem is if you can't, and then it's the spaceship thing. I always talk about the spaceship thing, right? So if you modify the trajectory of the spaceship way back here, you've only got, it takes a little bit of energy.
Right.
Well, the same thing, production cycles. But if you make me modify it here, the cost is vast. Moreover, if you cancel it here, right?
Oh my.
What you've done is destroyed all the capital under my curve, all of it. You've wasted it and my life. Now the capital may be recoverable, or you can't replace my life.
Right.
So the reason for rule of law is so that the more concrete your rule of law, the longer your production cycles. And I don't just mean like making lunch or making this computer. I mean normative. traditional, institutional, intergenerational cycles.
Right.
So that's why we need these things. We need of the law to be as close to science as possible, so we can produce the longest production cycles and produce the most good. And likewise, that's why policy needs to be temporary. If we had the civil rights movement and was supposed to last for 15 or 20 years, nobody would have, we wouldn't have this problem. Right? But they institutionalize it. And because all institutionalized law becomes a life of its own, like all bureaucracies become a life of their own, it's ever expanding. Why? Because unlike our list here, what is it not including?
No time scale. Yeah, it's unlimited.
Unlimited.
Metastatic is what we call that.
Well, that's what really is cancer. Laws like bureaucracies, like cancer, metastasis.
Yes.
Size, SI?
Metastasize, I think.
Size. I have some metastasize.
CI. Wow, that's a hard word. I'm going to look it
I
up.
had to know because it's happened to me.
I don't know, right? It's like spelling of it is another matter, though.
Metastasis, yeah. Metastasize.
Yeah, SIZE. ASIZE. There you go.
Uncontrolled growth.
That's Quigley talks about it as instruments, social instruments become institutions, and institutions have their own interests outside of the purpose for which they were organized.
So this plays into a really important concept I try to bring up pretty often, which is the difference between departments and projects.
Right.
And
Right, because it's like when you organize a department, it has its own interests. When you organize a project, it's self-limited.
so what happens is all departments are the same thing as all bureaucracies. And so we used to build things because we started out as like the military with departments. But if you look at how my product does, or how my company does, or how I've been counseling, advising companies, and how many companies started, I don't know, in the 80s through the 90s, is that what you want is projects. So the problem is, what do projects do?
Right. Calcification, yep. Ossification, that is the problem.
So
which is the desk sitter, right? It's well sitting, desk sitting.
Exactly. So I say there are only so many principles in the universe. It's actually a small number. We just have to get enough general knowledge to realize that it's always going to happen. The thing is, what do we want? We want non-adaptivity. We want to devote the most of our energy to consumption and the least of it to adaptation.
Right.
So because humans, quite logically, devote their energies to consumption, satisfaction.
That's right.
They, what did I say? They resist all costs.
Adaptation, right?
Adaptation. So what's happened is we've developed we have the projects, which is how you should run projects. and programs,
Right.
which is long running. And projects can be killed and people reallocated. The problem that leads to uncertainty, it's job uncertainty,
Right.
which leads to employee rotation,
Yes.
which leads to gig economies,
Yes.
right? Which leads to more uncertainty,
Yeah.
which leads to continuous education that forces continuous adaptation at the cost of consumption, which means that as we increase economic velocity, only those most able to adapt will remain employable, and the number that cannot continuously adapt, that will decline in employability.
Right.
So this is why capitalist, this is why capitalist economies fail. Economies fail, really fail. This is why socialist economies fail, and only mixed economies succeed, and only German style and succeed. And the reason is that the state maintains responsibility for continuous adaptation of the population. We call it employment, and that's the wrong end. Calling it employment
That should be in quotes.
is evading responsibility or taking responsibility for continuous assistance. Adaptation. The words, so it's like all the things that states do. They tell you they're solving a problem, and they're actually avoiding response. They're acknowledging the problem exists, and they're doing what looks like they're going to solve the problem, but it leaves the least accountability and responsibility, right? And forces the individual to still bear it. Well, so it's basically a false promise. So otherwise, it's a false. America in particular. A false promise. So what we have to do instead is create growth by fictional means.
We're going to expand the HR department.
Sorry?
We're going to expand the HR department.
Well, what we do is we flood it with credit, and we flood it with new people. And so we force the economy into things like housing and, and hyper consumption, but it's not producing innovation. It's like, our physicists haven't done anything since 1970. Or this is the 70s, we have two industries, medical and technology, right? And the rest of an awful lot of the economy is outsourcing all the innovation. So I remember having this debate with libertarians, and I said, well, sure, we should, if we can produce something cheaper overseas, it'll reduce prices for locals. I says, yeah, but you don't understand, you're exporting the knowledge, which make it possible for people to maintain pace of adaptation. Right. So what you're actually doing is is you're never accounting for the cost of to human capital of the price reduction obtained by labor arbitrage by shipping something offshore for
That's
production.
right, because you're going to forget how to do it. So you're ending up in Spain after they got the New World gold.
Exactly. And so this is, again, it's an evasion of responsibility because the government fails, the state fails as the maintainer of weights and measures. Right? The state fails to do a full accounting. And so if you look at what we do with property in toto, right, we go back up to here, we say, if you're not measuring all this capital, right, that's a balance sheet.
Right.
If we can tell, you can create an income statement that looks like you're making money, but it's not if you look at the balance sheet. Our balance sheet hadn't been very good for a long time.
Right. It's frightening.
Right. So where was I? Right. I don't know why I have them in this order. I don't know why I have them in this order. Why do I have them in this order? Am I doing okay? I feel like I'm boring you.
No, you're doing well. It's dry material.
Is it?
It's just a little dry. I
think it's fascinating because I'm a nerd.
Is that how it is? It's necessary to understand. It's absolutely essential.
So we're putting a lot of constraints on a law, and we're just beginning.
Right.
Right. This discussion.
Right.
How many of these things does we force our legislature to do?
Yeah, they're sadly under regulated.
Right.
And it's what it encourages sloppy politics is all it does.
It forces it causes unaccountability. So one of the things we're going to put in here is warranted and warrantable.
Right.
So you pass this legislation, you're warranting it.
Right.
Now are you going to go into government? Now are you going to go into government? Who's going to go into government when they got a warranty any law they pass?
Right.
Very different people go into government.
That sounds right to me.
So complete. So one of the problems here is that you want completeness because they throw it over the wall.
What does that mean?
It means that most legislation is written by special interest groups and circulated around the legislature.
Right, you're sign off on this.
Right, and it's so long that nobody can read it.
It is. It's just contemptible. It's like the key is that it was the bailout in 2008, and it was like 3,000 pages long or some nonsense. It's like we got to pass it to know what's in it. It was said by I believe one of the congressional leaders at the moment, and it's just stunning because it's like no one read it. It's not possible to understand it. It's just nonsense.
That was like, that's such a Pelosiism.
It was her.
Yeah. It's like, say something with female conviction and passion and agitation and emphasis. That's completely fucking illogical, right? That is a violation of every single possible logic there is. And do it as bald-faced. I mean, completely.
Right. And wait, the real kicker is this, and make it work.
Well, of course, under P law, that would have been a crime. Right? Even saying it would have been illegal. She wouldn't be able to hold office. She wouldn't be able to get into office. I just remember when, who was it? Back when she was the Cortez of the age, before she got into this. That's the problem with the Cortez, right? They turn into Nancy Pelosi's. They actually get somewhere. He said, I want to say, I can't remember exactly who it is. In my mind, it's Tip O'Neill, but that's not who it is. It says, Nancy Pelosi isn't exactly the brightest bulb in the shed, right? You know, I mean, just said it openly. She was a dipshit, right? But she uses the female means of warfare. Right? And the female means of warfare in politics is great. One of the guys sent me a link this morning from a Jordan Peterson to confirm my complaint all the time, because Peterson goes off there, and he's right. There's a huge literature on female antisocial behavior. But when I can get Peterson to put in a clip, that's different from me saying it.
Right.
But when he says it, people are gonna just say, oh, well, you know, I read the same fucking papers he does. Right. So Peterson came out and say, well, female antisocial behavior is how it's done. But the reason, of course, that we're in this position is because the introduction of women into the polity. Now, the fact that Peterson would say that, I was kind of floored, because it's only came out like 2 days ago. The fact that he would even say that was kind of amazing to me, given how his cowardice over the past. But it's actually true. It's like I said, there is only one problem. The underlying problem is that we didn't defend against female antisocial, economic, anti-political, anti-civilizational behavior upon adding women to the polity. And then we gave women spend 70% of money. Advertising is largely directed to women. The television is there directed toward the sale of advertising to women. And so the television basically uses the female strategy of warfare to undermine it in order to encourage women to, you know, it's this vicious cycle of freaking evil. Right. And you know, do women know any better? Of course not.
They're just following their own natural biases.
Right. I mean, until you know that it's like in primitive societies, what's the rate of violence? It's fucking huge. Guys kill each other all the time. What does it take? What have we spent making guys not kill each other for fucking making them embarrassed, right? Right. Well, we got to do the same with women. We got to domesticate women, which they hate. I enjoy saying, but they hate it. So the problem is completeness. Sorry, I'm jumping. I needed that break right there. I apologize.
That's all right.
So
you send me that link. I want to see that clip. Not right now.
Okay, so
data point. I'll send you a note.
Anyway, so it's so completeness is to prevent throwing over the wall. And so the problem is that it's written by special interests, promoted by special interests.
Right.
And then thrown over their wall to regulators to figure out, and the public to falsify by the high cost of judicial decision, where in many cases the court where in many cases the thing would not have passed if the exception that the court objects to would invalidate it. So in other words, it's a fucking scam. All right, it's irreciprocal.
Gesundheit.
So this is it's fucking evil. And so the other thing is that you have the cost of fighting these things.
Right.
So what you have is certain organizations, which are certain special interests, working on the behalf of certain groups that specialize in organizing money to push cases into the Supreme Court to bypass the legislative system and bypass the rule of law. So, if you read how liberals rewrote the Constitution, progressives rewrote the Constitution by Epstein, he does a great job of describing this process. But, it's like they came here to destroy. They said, we're going to do a march to the institutions. We're going to destroy education, we're going to destroy the media, and we're going to destroy the academy, and that we're going to destroy the legal system. They're the best thing that's best evidence. Of course, Kevin McDonald has documented all of this, but the person who's documented the literary side of it, of course, now is James Lindsay, done a better job.
Yeah.
But the person but Epstein and others have documented the way it was put through the legal system. So, the idea of having this immigration problem was done on purpose. It wasn't done for the moral reasons they claim. It was done, in other words, right, the same reason that the blacks were relocated to cities was to destroy the political capacity of the cities. It wasn't to do something charitable for blacks. The enemy never has a good reason. They just sell us on baiting into hazard by a pretense of morality, when they actually have produced an unwarrantable and fictionalism that in the end is extremely costly. I mean, if you bomb a city, we can rebuild it. But if you fuck up the population and the culture of the institutions, how do we rebuild it? I can't remember who said that. I was just reading it this morning. It was like Chesterton or one of those guys. No, that's not who it was. Not Chesterton. Anyway, your typical Brit saying that this is how they do it, right? You can, if you destroy a culture from cultures that are destroyed from without always can rebuild, but cultures destroyed within can't. This is why Islam and the new Christianity and the new woke are so dangerous, because they work at destroying you from within, and once you're destroyed from within, you're unrecoverable. Clean up my mess here. Okay. I feel like now see, this is what I'm always afraid of when we're working on this stuff.
What's that?
I'm afraid that I'm going to work on something too boring, and but it's necessary.
No, it's necessary, and it's is it too boring? And no, it's necessary work, and it is it's just, I think what you do is you just got to bite it off in bite-sized chunks and keep after it. So
I think I've got into complete. Is that if it's not complete, it can't pass. And that's pretty easy. You have to pass, you have to include regulatory input, right? Or how they will do it. And you have to conclude judicial decidability.
Right.
Right. So theoretically, what you're looking for is you're looking for popular approval, consent. You're looking for legislative decision. You're looking for regulatory methods, and for judicial possibility. I mean, you're looking for all of those things.
That may be a I think that completeness is it's like the definition of what is a proper law. You know what I mean? And it must contain certain elements, right? Like a limit, it has to be limited.
Yep.
So it's like, that's like the definition of the law, of a law. Does that make sense?
Right. Content. This is what I'm looking for. Complete content. Decidability. All right. You're trying to make it unambiguous.
Right.
Right. I should have gone there first. Sorry. So what you're trying to do is prevent if you look at I know nobody likes to, I'm a nerd, right? So, but like I'll occasionally look at some branch of the government and I'll go through their fucking regulations and their legislation that they're running by. And some of them, like the Forestry Service, right? That's pretty good stuff. They get told to do stupid stuff by the legislature, and they have a very subtle way of saying this isn't gonna fucking work. It's beautiful, I say, elegantly stated. So, you're in the Forest Service, and it's kind of cute, right? I mean, the way to do things, right? You look at other stuff, like anything to do with insurance or finance or medicine. It's corrupt or telecommunications. It's corrupt as fuck. Right. And it's like the point, you don't, and why? It's because the kind of person who goes in the Forest Service is wired a certain way. And their incentives turn out to be pretty much the incentives of the population. Then you get somebody you would think you'd get this out of the CDC. No. Right?
Yeah, no, those guys.
You would think you would, but you don't. And the reason you don't get out of the CDC is because there's no war game. There's no test of falsification of the bureaucracy. It's never put under duress, except when it is put under duress and it fails like it just did, right? It's a really big deal. So let's look at all the stuff the CDC said they do in preparation for the event they failed at. What you're saying is that nothing you do is actually very important. So if you can't follow your mission, so this is like the scope, the problem with bureaucracies is the scope, the scope of work expands to fill all available time. Well, that's really nice, except that the scope of work that fills available time is always in the self-interest of the bureaucracy.
Yes.
And so bureaucracies do the minimum time on serving the public good and the minimum money, and they spend the maximum time of self-recreation, self-improvement, and self-extraction. The way you only solve that is the way the military solves it, which is war games. And even the military can't do it anymore because they become a jobs program. We're going to find out pretty quickly. We're certainly finding out that the Navy can't pilot a ship without running into each other on a daily basis. Now, the next thing we have to worry, one of the things I should have done before completeness is I should have handled contingency as what does this depend upon? Specifically, what other laws? In other words, this creates a dependency chain.
Okay.
So that if something it depends upon fails, then this fails too. Right? And that leads us to the fact that it's perishable. So this means in project law,
Yeah.
project and program law. You're never going to run out. The Justice Department should run on programs, right? Of which have projects. So it's just a cycle. Perpetual law. Cancer law.
Yeah.
So what we're looking for is that there are criteria for perishing, and that's usually going to be a time, right? So you have a lot of things that are like there's 99 years, right? But a lot of things today need to be shorter term, right? And they need to have goals. And they need a time frame.
Endpoints, right?
Endpoints, yeah. So what'll happen, of course, is what?
And there's a measurable issue there too, right?
Yes.
And do we have that in there? Is it one of your points here?
Well, I think this is measurable. Yes, that should be it. Hearable, enforceable, enforced, and measurable. Whoop.
Which is interesting. It's like it's rules, right? How do you measure it? What are you measuring? So it's right. So we have goals in there somewhere, yeah.
I think it's already for the beginning.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, that's not it.
no. Contingent. Thought I stated it. I know it's here. Here it is.
So that's part of the limits. So limits and measures go together, right?
Let's put that limit measured. Limited. And the problem is I want to separate those goals. Goals, stated goals.
Right. So that's your number 8 above it.
There's just the I have to go and renumber all this.
No, I'm not looking at that. I'm just trying to index it for you, which is to say it's repetitious now with that measurable there.
Right.
So it's like the suggestion in my mind here is that it's just a formatting, right? The law must be formatted in an understandable way. We talked about understandable. And it's like the issue is formatting makes it understandable, right? Because it's complex. Now you're increasing the complexity of a law by all these standards.
I'm creating, in programming terms, I'm creating a class called law.
Right.
That class has properties and
Right.
methods. This is that class.
Yes.
Right. And that is the class, and these are the criteria.
That make it fit into the class.
Right. So these are the
Okay.
requirements. So these, you think of these as so in any class you have a set of properties. By
Right.
setting a property, it means running a test.
Okay.
And so when I get up here and I say it's algorithmic, I mean that it follows this process. That process is a template, which is it's a type there. You create an instance of a class, which is this, and this is the verbal method of filling out this checklist.
Right.
Right. And so once you've done that, you have a prescription that all laws must adhere to.
Right.
Right. And that's testable. And under our law, it's got to be warranted and warrantable. And those
Right.
two things are different. Unless you have this, it isn't warrantable. This is and one of the things that we get to is whether it's reversible and restitutable. So this prevents their incrementalism. Since since all legislation is theoretical, it must be reversible and restitutable.
In its function.
So in other words, if this doesn't work, then this is how we
Fix it.
we fix it or reverse it and pay compensation.
Right, damages.
Now, you want to talk about making people accountable,
Right.
right? That's holding the government at the same government we hold, surgeons and policemen.
That's right. They're professionals. They need to be held to this similar standard.
And so what I'm hoping, what I want by this is I want you to be afraid of.
Right. Signing that thing.
I want you to be afraid. I want to be afraid of even taking the fucking job. Right? The only person that's going to take this job is a person who knows that he can do it.
That's right. There's no room for weak lilies.
Because there are consequences.
Right. Personal consequences.
Yeah. So this is the equivalent of directors.
Yeah.
Board. So this is the equivalent, right? So like they passed this law that if you're the CFO and the CEO, you've got to know all this stuff in your company. You absolutely cannot fucking know that. Right? But you can perform a lot of due diligence. Right? In order to be sure. Now that drove up the cost of running a public company through the roof, right? Trying to stop saying right. That drove up the cost of the company, running a public company through the roof. And it really infuriated me when they passed it. But I'm like, well, it infuriates me but as a CEO, because first of all, that's, you just can't know.
That's right. It's too much to know.
You can't, right? So but on the other hand, that's what you can do is create a bunch of subsidiaries, each with their own CEOs whose work rolls up to you, who can know. And so this is the same problem of governments, right? It's just we make those guys accountable, and they'll be afraid, which is what we want. We don't want you going in there thinking that you can get away with stuff, because that's the place where what you do with the government is you go there to get away with stuff.
Yeah. And do it, apparently, to date.
So if I put out this law and I said, well, there's if this is reversible and restitutable, then how? If this project fails under these terms, right? Then I should put this specifically.
Right.
Right. Then I'm going to be able to, and just by making them do this, if you had to publish this thing before you could process a law, laws would be very clear.
Which is the opposite of the intentionality at this point.
And you can even separate like the legislation from the regulation so that people can read it. But I mean, the idea that we should pass something and then read it, that's freaking insane. All right, so what have I not covered here? I think we got most everything. All right, well, understandable is obvious, right? And this is what they call simple laws. The reason I like natural law is a simple law, because it's really close to morality,
Yeah,
right? And so if it's not a simple one, you can't understand, you can't obey it.
that's right.
Like, that's like, and my favorite one is the IRS. Is that they can give you bad advice, you could do it and still be punished for it. The problem is you can't understand that law.
I'm of the opinion that the laws are necessarily complicated for the purpose of making them ununderstandable, therefore enabling tyranny.
Which is why the argument for flat taxes. Flat, instead of really complex laws with a lot of deductions, it's just a flat tax, and then there's redistribution. Rather
Right,
than
so
play it.
the issue is so it goes to, this is like in my work, and it's the same thing. It's like there's no base. You can't do it correctly. It's just a matter of how much scrutiny will you bear before they find the things that you did that were wrong and then punish you the way they want to punish you to the extent that they wish to punish you. It's like, son of a bitch. It's just very untenable, unacceptable reality.
I think what you'd get if we had this set up the way I'm suggesting is you'd get, just like you have concierge doctors, which I absolutely love, you'd have professional doctors and semi-professional doctors. In other words, state-funded doctors would be semi-professional. And then you have professional doctors. And professional doctors would be not bound by those same regulations, right? And it's sort of similar to the lawyer and the barrister problem. And there ought to be that kind of thing. And we have CPAs and we have CPAs and we have
the regulations that this is how they get you. This is quite interesting because it's like if the professional doctor that takes money from patients and nobody else is not subject to those tyrannies that I'm talking about.
Say that again, I didn't get it.
The doctor who takes his money from the patient and nobody else is merely responsible to the patient.
And
okay.
Nobody else.
And nobody else. And it's like everybody else's that are the problem. Because it's the guys with the money that are putting all kind of strings all over the place. And it's like they're booby traps. Just if they get mad at you, then they can cause you all kind of harm and
well, I've said this
damages.
before, is that there should be that the patient, the doctor should get paid directly by the patient. I don't care what the institution gets paid for. In other words, I don't care about the drug costs. The reason is I want to make sure they're good doctors.
I think that's a wise choice. It's like, because it's like the other issue is interesting because it's like this: the doctor can cause harm to patients as long as he's doing what the paymasters say.
Yeah.
Just awful. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
So yes, we're in agreement. What I want to do,
I think we're here. I mean, I think we're done with this.
I think that we're done with this.
You know, I don't need to go over adherable and enforceable.
No.
I can do it and you can enforce it. It's actually enforced.
Yeah.
We covered the hard ones, which is what I was trying to do.
Good. It worked.
Right. And then all I want to do is the obvious next step is, okay, what the heck does that look like? Well, that looks like that. And then we get into we get into next is, okay, so let's talk about what constructing a system of these things looks like. And that's going to get into,
okay,
these terms. So I think we did just fine. Because we're coming up on 2 hours now, right?
Yeah.
So I hope that wasn't too boring.
No, it was excellent. It was informative, and it certainly spurs a great deal of thought.
Well, it makes it really obvious what's wrong.
Right.
What's wrong is obvious. It's a fucking game up there of politics. It's not legislation. And it's corrupt as hell. The difference is, if I go to Russia and Ukraine, the corruption's right there in front of me, and the $50 I give this guy is paying for his home mortgage this month, right? Whereas you and we don't pay $50, we pay 5,000, right? And it goes off into the ether somewhere, and we get to claim because due process was followed, it wasn't corrupt. No, it's just corrupt due process. So it's why I say, you don't have to, you just have to disambiguate the law, legislation, government, and it makes perfect sense. The problem is they use ambiguity to create corruption.
That's correct. That was wonderful.
We're
making progress. It's just good, steady progress. So I will send you the link to this video, and we will move forward on Saturday.
Okay, boss, enjoy it.
It's a pleasure to talk to you again, Kurt.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.